My name is Alan Wexler, and I am, at the time of writing this, the director and part owner of Hollow Glen Memorial Home. For most of my career, I've taken pride in being a man of detail certified in thanatology, OSHA compliant down to the label, and thorough enough that the medical examiner once said my prep logs were more accurate than hospital discharge papers. That used to mean something to me. Precision, protocol, the illusion of control. It was the scaffolding I built my life on, but something happened 3 years ago that shattered it. And if I try to explain it now, I don't do it to seek understanding or forgiveness. I write because forgetting is no longer an option. It started on an ordinary autumn morning, October 5th, 2022, Tuesday. The air was heavy with condensation, the kind that sticks to glass like breath on skin. I arrived early. My assistant Rachel hadn't clocked in yet, and the place was silent, just the hum of refrigeration units and the soft tap of moisture dripping into the floor drain outside the embalming suite. I had a body scheduled for prep that morning. Jonas Roth, age 62, heart failure, paperwork filed from the Glenmore Senior Residence. Nothing unusual at first glance. His file was slim, less than 2 pages. Cause of death marked as acute myocardial infarction. No autopsy performed per family request. The time of death was listed as 3:11 a.m. I noted that immediately, because it was the same minute the facility's security system registered a 5-second blackout. Correlation? Probably just a grid flicker. I signed the intake sheet, pulled on my gloves, and unlocked the cooler. Jonas had been transported around 4:45 a.m., and his body temp had stabilized to a chilled 6 degrees Celsius. I began the usual external cleansing. His skin was pale but not marbled, and rigor mortis had already begun to fade. I inspected his mouth, checked the capillary refill on his extremities out of habit, and positioned him for arterial injection. Everything was routine until it wasn't. As I leaned over to adjust the chin strap, I felt a soft puff of air against my cheek. At first, I thought it was my own breath rebounding off the surgical mask, but I hadn't exhaled. I froze. I leaned closer. Nothing. I stepped back. Silence. I tried to dismiss it as a draft or the compressor in the wall unit kicking on. But then, as I adjusted the headrest, I heard it. A faint sound, like the beginning of a word forming just under the tongue. Not a breath, not an exhale. A phoning. I stared at his face, my gloved hand still under his jaw. His eyes remained closed, lips parted slightly from the jaw tape. I checked the ambient temperature 62 degrees. I scanned the vitals from the intake sheet again. No pacemaker, no medical implants, no known neurological conditions. I told myself it was residual gas movement, a release of pressure perhaps, perfectly normal. But that explanation frayed under even modest scrutiny. I had prepared thousands of bodies. I knew the mechanical sounds they could make. Gurgles, pops, crackles. This wasn't that. This had cadence. It was shaped, as if something underneath was remembering how to speak. I called Rachel on the intercom and told her to delay the chapel prep and come straight to room 3. I needed a second pair of ears. When she arrived, I asked her to stand near the prep table while I stepped out to recheck the logbooks. No power surge had been recorded since the flicker at 3:11. I returned to the suite, and Rachel had this look blank but stretched tight. "Alan," she said, "did you check for cardiac residuals?" I nodded. Of course I had. I always do. Then why did his shoulder just lift like he was trying to turn over? She whispered. I told her to step back, and I approached the table again. I leaned close to the mouth. Nothing. I ran a finger gently along the orbital ridge, no twitching, no spasms. Still, but the room itself felt different. The air thicker, the lights dimmer. I'd seen people die. I'd felt that last moment when breath leaves and silence becomes a presence. This wasn't like that. This felt like the moment before something inhales. Anticipation, like a storm holding its breath. I documented the incident, typed a short internal memo, and flagged it in our secure server. Rachel said nothing else for the rest of the day, but I caught her glancing over her shoulder more than once as we walked the halls. That night, I checked the security camera pointed toward the suite. At 3:09, the screen goes black. 5 seconds of total digital silence. No static, no distortion, just absence. And then the feed returns as if nothing happened. Jonas Roth's body had already arrived. The transport van was visible parked outside, but there was no footage of his intake. The entire stretch between the van backing in and the moment I appeared with the intake clipboard was missing. Time-stamped, but empty, like the recorder blinked. I requested the original intake papers from Glenmore. They responded 2 days later with a form marked digitally reconstructed due to file loss. The time of death was now listed as 3:16. I double-checked our own copy. Ours still said 3:11. Identical signatures, different timestamps. I called the hospice nurse listed on the form. The line was disconnected. By the end of that week, Rachel started asking questions carefully at first. Had I ever seen a corpse move post-mortem? Had I ever heard breath after rigor had begun to dissipate? I told her we'd seen tremors before, and post-mortem reflexes weren't unheard of, but she cut me off. No, she said, I mean purposeful motion. Like there's something trying to come back. I laughed too quickly, too defensively. We both knew that wasn't science. That was superstition. But science had left the building at 3:11 on October 5th. We scheduled Jonas Roth's visitation for the following Saturday. Closed casket per the family's wishes. No clergy, no eulogy. Just music and a display table of old fishing trophies and faded photos. I stood behind the viewing curtain, watching the mourners shuffle past. At precisely 4:06 p.m., the floral arrangement beside the casket tipped forward. I rushed to steady it, and as I did, I felt vibration through the metal lid, like a tapping from inside. I froze. 3 light wraps. I looked around. No one seemed to have noticed except Rachel. Her face was white. Her fingers clenched the service pamphlet like a blade. After the ceremony, we wheeled the casket back into holding. Rachel demanded we check it. I told her no out of protocol, respect professionalism. But I was lying. I didn't want to open it because I was afraid of what I'd find, or what I wouldn't. That night, I set a motion-activated camera inside the suite, just in case. I reviewed the footage the next morning. At 2:38 a.m., the screen lit up. The casket shifted no visible cause. The lid vibrated again. Not 3 taps this time. 5, then nothing. I pulled the footage onto a secure USB and placed it in a locked drawer in my office. The file was named JR_1_log. I did not report it. I told myself I'd imagine the first whisper, the tapping, the timestamp change. I told myself all these things because the alternative was too vast, too loose. But there was a moment before dawn, as I walked the hallway toward the embalming rooms, that I heard a voice not loud, not close, but from deep within the ventilation, and it said just one word: cold. I stopped walking. I did not turn. I went back to my office, shut the door, and sat without moving until sunrise. That was the first week of October, the beginning of a season I have not yet escaped. What came after would unwind everything I had built, not only as a director, but as a man who believed he understood where the boundary of death truly lay. And Jonas Roth was only the first. The days following Jonas Roth's service unfolded like a fog that refused to lift. I continued to manage the facility with the same deliberate rhythm coordinating cremations, logging deliveries, soothing families. But something beneath the routines had shifted, like the floorboards were subtly warping underfoot. Rachel avoided room 3 completely. When I asked her to prep the station for a new intake, she paused, her hand frozen mid-signature over the embalming ledger, and said she'd prefer to handle the cosmetics in viewing room 2. Instead, I didn't press. I understood, because I had begun avoiding the room too. We were booked that week for 3 back-to-back services, all fairly standard. On Thursday, we received a transfer from Lakeview Retirement Center. Mr. Daniel Voss, 79, pronounced dead at 4:23 a.m. The transport paperwork checked out no discrepancies in timestamps, clean coroner signature, autopsy declined by family, as usual. But there was one detail that caught my eye as I signed the intake. The attending physician's name on the death certificate was the same one listed on Jonas Roth's Dr. Elaine Horner. It registered as a curiosity, not a concern. In small towns, doctors handle multiple facilities. Still, a needle scratched faintly at the back of my neck as I filed the paperwork. Daniel Voss was scheduled for visitation on Friday evening, followed by interment the next morning. The family requested a closed casket due to visible trauma sustained in a fall. Though the body bore no signs of damage during prep, Rachel handled the facial restoration. I oversaw the embalming. Nothing strange occurred, at least not during the actual process. The real problem came during the service. It was a somber affair. 30 guests, soft batch over the chapel speakers, flowers sent from a local vendor I'd known for years. The casket, a standard mahogany veneer model with gold-tone fixtures, had been secured properly by myself and double-checked by Rachel. We used a custom locking mechanism, an internal brace that prevents accidental opening. It was shut, we were certain. The guests began arriving at 6:15 p.m., milling around the foyer. The casket sat undisturbed in the center of the room under soft lighting. I stood just behind the curtain. In the service corridor, it gave me line of sight into the chapel through a concealed slit. At exactly 6:42, something happened that still makes my stomach churn. The casket shifted, not trembled, not rocked due to floorboards or movement in the building. It lifted just slightly and dropped back into place with an audible thud. I saw it. Rachel saw it. And so did the woman in the second pew, Daniel Voss's niece, I would later learn, who gasped and rose to her feet. A murmur spread through the attendees. Someone whispered, "Earthquake?" Another said, "It was just the floor settling." But Rachel was already moving, her hand white-knuckled around her tablet, eyes fixed on the casket. I intercepted her halfway down the aisle. "Don't," I said under my breath. "Not here, not in front of them." She hesitated, then nodded and turned away. I walked calmly to the podium, thanked the attendees for their patience, and attributed the disturbance to a structural shift from last week's minor tremor. It was a lie, of course, but I said it gently, and people seemed to accept it. The rest of the evening passed in strained quiet. After the last guest had left, Rachel and I returned to the chapel and approached the casket together. I ran my hand across the lid still sealed. I checked the brace, still locked. There were no signs of impact, no scratches or marks on the surrounding dais. Rachel stared at the floor, then said, "You saw it too." It lifted. I nodded slowly, afraid to speak. That night, I pulled the security footage from the ceiling-mounted camera in Chapel A. It had been recording continuously. I scrubbed to 6:42 p.m. and stared at the timeline. The video jumped exactly 4 seconds missing. It skipped from 6 hours 41 minutes and 58 seconds to 6 hours 42 minutes and 2 seconds. No distortion, no glitch, just a clean severance. I rewound, replayed, re-exported. Nothing changed. I checked the other chapel cameras, lobby, hallway, foyer. They all ran uninterrupted. Only Chapel A had the gap. My hands were shaking as I saved the file. I named it DV_event_1. I didn't tell Rachel I had it. The next morning, I received a call from the cemetery groundskeeper. He said the Voss family was concerned about burial time and requested we expedite the transport. Rachel and I rode together in the hearse. She didn't speak until we were halfway there, and when she did, her voice was small. "Alan, have you ever heard of delayed neural signals? Like post-mortem reflexes that simulate muscle contraction?" I told her I had, and that yes, some morticians had observed rare myoclonic twitches or gas pressure-induced jerks, but not full skeletal shifts. Not coordinated ones. not synchronized enough to lift a 150-pound lid. She looked out the window. "I had a dream last night," she said. Jonas Roth was standing in the chapel. He was wearing the wrong shoes. He looked at me and said, "It's too cold in here." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because I'd heard those words, two spoken through a vent at 3:11 a.m. days earlier. We completed the interment without issue. The Voss family made no mention of the incident from the night before. It was as if they'd accepted my lie about the floor tremor and filed the moment away under the growing drawer of things we explain just to keep going. But Rachel and I knew we were compiling our own drawer. Ours was labeled Events and had dates, times, and signatures. That weekend, I revisited Jonas Roth's file. Something nagged at me the physician's name, Dr. Elaine Horner. I searched the county medical registry. She had no recent activity. Her license had expired in 2019. I pulled her listed address. It was a closed psychiatric hospital 40 minutes north. No forwarding contact, no phone number. I called Lakeview, asked for confirmation, and was told by a harried nurse that Dr. Horner still works with us through a remote review contract, but wouldn't elaborate. I requested her signature archive. They refused, citing HIPAA. When I mentioned the time-stamp discrepancy, they hung up. By Sunday, Rachel brought me something she'd printed, a side-by-side comparison of the intake documents for Jonas Roth and Daniel Voss. Fonts didn't match. Signature placements were off by millimeters. She ran the JPEGs through a layering tool and found both had identical baseline noise, suggesting they were scanned from a reused template. In other words, forged. That night, we sat in my office reviewing every body we had received in the last 6 months. We flagged 7, all from the same Tri-County region, all with death certificates signed by Horner, all with family instructions to avoid autopsy. And this was the part that turned my stomach. 5 of them had been pre-cremation. No physical trace left. Only 2 remained in refrigeration, one in long-term hold due to family dispute, the other scheduled for embalming the following Tuesday. Rachel and I agreed we would examine the new arrival together, log every detail, cross-reference everything with what we had so far. We began building a wall of documents, post-it notes, flowcharts, pins, and yarn. It felt like we were preparing for a trial, but we didn't know who the defendant was, or if the crime had even been named. Before locking up, I walked down to the refrigeration wing alone. I needed to see Jonas Roth's compartment. His body had been released to cremation 2 weeks ago, or so I'd signed. But as I opened the steel door, I found something strange. His nameplate had been reattached. The internal tag was gone. No record of release was filed in our digital logs. His cremation ID had vanished from the database, and inside his compartment was not empty. It was sealed shut, bolted, but not by us. That night, I didn't sleep. I played the security tape again, and again, and again. At exactly 2:41 a.m., the lights in Chapel A dimmed. The casket of Daniel Voss shifted. 5 seconds of silence. Then, in the distant audio bleed, you could hear something, a faint breath, and under it, a voice not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. Too cold. The same phrase, the same timing, the same impossible recurrence. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't an isolated glitch. It was a pattern, and it was only just beginning. I didn't want to believe what Rachel's document comparison was suggesting, but I couldn't argue with it either. A death certificate is a legal artifact. Tampering with it means more than fraud, it means intent. So when I sat down alone in my office late that night, lights dimmed, rain tapping against the old frosted windows, I wasn't just looking for inconsistencies anymore. I was looking for something much heavier, a reason, a crack in the system wide enough for whatever was happening to slip through. I began with Jonas Roth. The transfer forms, embalming authorization, and cremation request were all filed correctly, but too perfectly. The ink didn't smudge. The date formatting matched across different staff handwriting. The tags on his personal effects had uniform fold lines, like they'd never been handled. Even the signature from his daughter, Evelyn Roth, seemed oddly steady, not rushed, not emotional, as though someone had taken their time forging a careful, calm version of grief. It took me hours to find her contact. No number listed on the documents, no next of kin attached in the state database. But we keep a photocopy of each family-provided ID as part of our verification protocol. I pulled Evelyn's and ran a search through Lextrasa, professional database we use to verify death claims. Evelyn Roth had no listed address, no driver's license, no digital signature in any banking or medical institution. Not dead, not alive, just not there. It was as if she existed only in the space between our intake folder and our database. Rachel and I returned to this over and over in the following days, trying to find some mundane explanation, a data entry error, a paperwork copy mistake, anything. But that explanation never came. And then the call arrived. A voicemail, actually, recorded at 2:37 a.m. on our internal line. A woman's voice, static-washed and whisper-quiet. You don't want to know where Jonas was before he came to you. Don't ask them. Just burn the tape. There was no return number. The log listed it as internal, originating from our own facility. We checked the phone system the next morning. No signs of tampering. No missing access codes. But the voicemail file was there, recorded and archived like any other message, except for the source tag, line 0. We don't have a line 0. That same day, Rachel made a decision I didn't agree with. She drove 2 hours to the Glenmore senior residence, where Jonas Roth had reportedly died. She told the receptionist she was there for a routine record check as part of state compliance verification, a bluff we've used in rare cases of discrepancy. The receptionist hesitated, then said softly, "I'll get the administrator," but no one came. Rachel waited in the lobby for 30 minutes. Eventually, a nurse approached her and asked what name she was inquiring about. When Rachel said Jonas Roth, the woman frowned, then said, "That room's been empty for 2 years." Rachel pressed further. "Was Roth ever a patient there?" The nurse shook her head. "We haven't had any Roths since before the pandemic." Rachel drove back shaken. She didn't say much when she returned, just handed me a laminated guest badge from Glenmore. I turned it over. The back was stamped with the words, "Visitor, Access Level B." Below that, faintly embossed under UV light, were 3 initials, WHP. That was the second time we encountered that acronym. The first had been on the corner of a handwritten note found inside Jonas Roth's clothing bag. It had looked like a laundry code, something dismissed during initial intake. But Rachel had kept it. She showed me again. WHP 1127. A tag number? A protocol? A holding location? Theories spun like insects around a bulb. Unable to let it go, I placed a quiet call to the only person I knew who might still have access to Glenmore's deeper records, an old colleague from mortuary school, Dorian Heller, who had transitioned into regulatory inspection after a short career in private death care. I hadn't spoken to him in a decade. When I explained the situation in vague terms, his voice went flat. "Alan, if you value your license, stop looking." I pushed him. I told him what Rachel had seen, what we'd found, the voicemail, the casket movement, the missing cremation logs. He went quiet for a long time, then said something I will never forget. "There's a list, Alan, a restricted pool of cases processed through something called Whisper. We weren't supposed to know about it, but they trained us to identify the signature's false witnesses, unusual preservation behaviors, death without visible trauma, bodies that return cold, but with internal signs of irregular heat mapping. Don't follow this trail. It doesn't end in a court or a hearing. It ends in silence." I recorded our conversation. I shouldn't have, but I did. The file sits on a hidden drive labeled Dorian_Warren_1. It ends with the sound of him hanging up. That weekend, the next service took place. A middle-aged man named Jeremy Hay, 44, declared dead from a hiking accident. Cause of death? Blunt force trauma. The police report was sealed, but the attending coroner was again Dr. Elaine Horner. The funeral was scheduled for Sunday at 3 p.m., but something strange happened the night before. Rachel and I, out of paranoia or caution, or both, decided to check the prep room one more time. The casket had been sealed, dressed, placed under refrigeration, but when we entered room 1, the temperature was off. It was warm. We checked the thermostat. It read 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The cooling system wasn't malfunctioning. It was off, manually. The log said it had been disabled at 2:13 a.m. No staff was present at that time. Our facility is locked, alarmed, and motion sensitive, but the system showed a manual override, a full shutdown initiated by ... my access code. I hadn't been there. We opened the casket. The body was perfectly preserved. Too perfect. No signs of decomposition, no skin discoloration, no post-mortem settling. Jeremy Hay looked asleep, peaceful. Rachel touched his wrist with the back of her glove. "He's warm," she said. I checked. She was right. A consistent 79 degrees Fahrenheit. I grabbed the infrared thermometer and scanned his forehead. The reading was absurd. 80.4 degrees Fahrenheit. In any other context, that would indicate a living person in mild hypothermia, but Hay had been dead for 5 days. I called the crematory subcontractor we sometimes use and told them the family had requested incineration immediately following the service. They asked why the rush. I didn't answer. At the service, Rachel stood rigid in the back of the room. I stood at the front, rehearsing my closing line. But something was wrong. I felt it before I saw it, like the moment before a bulb burns out. The air pressure changed. The lights dimmed. The flowers on the lectern twitched. And then, from inside the casket, we heard it. A sound, low, muffled. A shift. Rachel screamed. The service ended in chaos. I told the family it was structural resonance from the speakers. A faulty subwoofer placed too close to the base. They didn't believe me. I didn't believe myself. Later that night, Rachel came into my office holding the cremation authorization form. "Look at the name," she said. I did. It wasn't Jeremy Hay. It was Jonas Roth. We stood in silence. The signature was the same. The ID number was the same. But the name had changed, or reverted, or revealed itself. Rachel said one thing, barely a whisper. "They're not different people." I nodded, because deep down, I'd begun to feel it too, as if we weren't dealing with multiple deaths, but one death wearing different faces. And now it was coming back again. The morning after the Roth Hay incident, I arrived at Hollow Glen before sunrise. Not because I had anything urgent to prepare, but because sleep had become a stranger, and the air at home felt too thin to breathe. Rachel was already there. I found her in the embalming suite, motionless, standing beside the prep table where we'd left the casket it was supposed to contain Jeremy Hay or Jonas Roth or whatever name the record had decided to wear last. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. We stood in silence until the sound of the main door opening forced us back into the roles we were trained to play: composed, professional, skeptical of ghosts. That day, we had a scheduled closed casket service for a man named Thomas Greeley, age 74. Official cause of death, stroke. Survived by his son, Arthur, and a sister from Vermont who had arranged to arrive by mid-afternoon. The body had come to us 3 days prior, paperwork in order, no red flags, no WEP tags, no inconsistencies, no whispered warnings in the night. On the surface, it was routine, but nothing at Hollow Glen felt routine anymore, and that feeling only worsened when Rachel handed me a note from the crematory coordinator. It was short, just a name, Greeley. Again? I called the number on the coordinator's tag, asked what she meant. She hesitated before answering. We processed a Greeley 2 weeks ago. Same first name, same date of birth. Died in Chicago. Paperwork was marked High Priority Client Code, WHP, but it was a private disposal. No viewings. No ceremony. We were instructed not to retain remains. I asked her to send me whatever documentation she still had. She agreed, reluctantly, and by noon, a digital copy of the cremation log had landed in my inbox. There it was. Thomas Greeley. Same birth date. Different death certificate number. The form was co-signed by someone named Dr. Horner again. I printed it out, walked slowly to the viewing room, where Rachel was adjusting the lighting. She saw the paper in my hand and didn't even ask. "How many names are going to come back?" she said. "How many times can someone die before it sticks?" We decided to confront Arthur Greeley, the son. We had no idea what we were expecting: panic, confusion, maybe some admission of mistake or familial estrangement. Instead, what we got was even worse. Total calm. He arrived dressed in a dark gray suit, tie slightly askew, holding a folded eulogy in one hand and a small silver box in the other. He greeted us with polite nods, even offered a faint smile. "Thanks for taking care of everything on such short notice," he said. "I know it's been complicated." We asked about the other Thomas Greeley, the one cremated in Chicago. His expression didn't change. "They burned the wrong man," he said softly. "It's not the first time. It probably won't be the last." Rachel asked, "Who was in that urn then?" Arthur looked down at the silver box. "Someone else," he said. "Someone who wore my father's face for a little while. We should have stopped him there, called security, contacted the authorities." But Rachel and I had both seen enough in the last few weeks to recognize that the old rules didn't apply. Not here. Not anymore. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock. Closed casket, as Arthur had requested. A few distant relatives sat quietly in the front row, none of them familiar, all of them strangely silent. As the organist played a slow, unfamiliar melody, I watched Rachel from the side corridor. She was pale, sweating, glancing every few seconds at the casket, like it might move again, like the last one had. Then the doors opened. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a late guest, but when I saw him, I froze. The man walking down the aisle was Thomas Greeley, or someone who looked exactly like him. Same height, same build, same liver-spotted hands and gray temples. He wore a beige overcoat, dark pants, and a red scarf, and he was walking with purpose, as if he had every right to be there, as if he belonged. Arthur didn't flinch. No one in the front row even turned around. The man stopped at the casket, laid a single white carnation on the lid, then looked up right at me. Not at Rachel, not at the guests, at me. He smiled, then walked back out, slowly disappearing through the rear exit before I could move. I turned to Rachel. "Did you see?" But she was already gone, rushing out the side hall. I chased after her, through the corridor, out into the parking lot. Nothing. No cars moving. No doors slamming. Just the empty silence of our lot, and a faint echo of footsteps that could have been mine. Back inside, I opened the casket. The body was gone. In its place, a folded piece of paper, a funeral program. It was dated 3 days from now, the name printed on the front, "In loving memory of Alan Wexler." My hands went cold. I looked around. No one else saw it. Rachel was still outside, and Arthur was calmly speaking to the few attendees who remained. I tucked the paper into my coat pocket and sealed the casket again. Later that night, I reviewed the security footage. I watched the man walk in, frame by frame. I watched him place the flower, stare at the camera, and smile. I watched him vanish through the exit. But the strangest part wasn't his face or his presence. It was the time code. The camera marked the moment he entered the room at 2 hours 59 minutes and 46 seconds. And when he vanished, 2 hours 59 minutes and 47 seconds. 1 second. That's all it recorded. I checked the time manually, looked at the atomic clock reference. No glitch, no lag. The recording jumped from one frame to the next, seamlessly, except the man's motion showed at least 30 seconds of walking, turning, standing. Whatever that was, it didn't follow our rules of time. or space, or death. The next morning, I found the flower he had placed on the casket sitting in my office chair. Fresh, no stem, just a white carnation. Exactly like the ones we never order, but keep finding anyway. The week after the Greeley service, I started checking the funeral home's manifest twice a day. I didn't trust the system anymore. The entries, the names, the dates. It was as if something unseen was rewriting our files. Not always drastically, but enough to alter a name, shift a time, duplicate a record. Rachel called it background noise made real, and while I wanted to dismiss it as stress or sleep deprivation, the flower in my office chair had stayed fresh for 3 days without water before it blackened in a single hour. I kept the remains in a sealed container in my bottom drawer, right next to the WHP alert forms we stopped sending. There were no protocols for this. No hotline, no handbook. Only a mounting series of anomalies, growing louder, like a frequency shifting toward a broadcast no one had authorized. Our next service was for a woman named Evelyn Halpern, 86 years old, died of natural causes. Or so the report said. Her son, Dr. Mitchell Halpern, made all the arrangements. Neurologist, highly detailed, efficient, polite. But behind his eyes there was something else, an exhaustion I recognized, not from grief, but from long-term containment. He didn't seem surprised when we asked him to verify the body twice. He even nodded when I told him the lighting in room 2 had been flickering since we brought her in. "It will," he said. "They do that." I should have stopped him, asked who he meant, but I didn't. I was too busy reviewing the guest list, checking security camera angles, rechecking our entry log timestamps against the ones from the Greeley incident. I had started compiling my own database, parallel to the official one that wouldn't disappear or rewrite itself while I slept. The ceremony was scheduled for Saturday, 2 p.m. sharp, 43 guests confirmed. I triple-checked the seating layout. Rachel handled florals and music. Everything ran smoothly until 10 minutes before the service began, when one of the ushers, Jason, our intern, pulled me aside and said, "There's a couple asking for their seats, but they're not on the list." Said they were friends of the deceased, but the names aren't even close to anyone we have logged. I went to the entrance, expecting to find a confused elderly couple. Instead, I saw them, a man and a woman, early 50s, dressed immaculately, hair combed, suits tailored, hands gloved. But their expressions were too still, their eyes too wide, and something about their posture felt off, like they were being held in place, not by muscle or intention, but by some invisible constraint. "May I ask your names?" I said, clipboard in hand. The woman answered first. "We're the Glovers, friends of Evelyn. She invited us." I frowned. "Evelyn Halpern?" The man nodded. "Yes. She asked us to be here, in the invitation. Said she wanted witnesses." I checked my manifest again. No Glovers. No mention of that name anywhere. I asked Rachel to verify with the family. She returned minutes later, pale. "Mitchell says he's never heard of them, and Evelyn hasn't sent a written invitation to anyone in 5 years. She had advanced Parkinson's, could barely write." I turned back to the Glovers. "I'm sorry, but we can't confirm your invitation. This is a private service." The woman's smile didn't falter. "Oh, we understand. We'll be in the back," quietly. Before I could say no, they walked past me unhurried, synchronized, like actors moving on cue, and entered the chapel. I asked Jason to keep an eye on them. He didn't even answer, just nodded, slowly, like someone remembering a nightmare in real time. The service began on schedule. Rachel played the prelude music, an arrangement Evelyn's sister had requested, but halfway through the second hymn, the lights dimmed. Not flickered, dimmed, evenly, purposefully. I saw Mitchell's head jerk up. He looked toward the Glovers, now seated in the third row, dead center, hands folded on their laps. They hadn't moved. The minister continued speaking, voice wavering slightly. Then the projector screen behind him, which was supposed to play a slideshow of Evelyn's life, began showing something else. Footage. Grainy, black and white, surveillance camera angle. A room, not ours. Not Evelyn's. A hospital corridor, maybe. The image trembled slightly, like an old tape degraded by time. Then a figure appeared, slowly emerging from the edge of the frame. It was Evelyn, but not frail. Not 86. Young, late 30s, wearing a medical gown, and running. Running like she was being chased. I rose to my feet. So did Rachel. Jason had vanished. The screen flickered again. A second image overlaid the first. Another corridor. A different angle. Same figure. Now the colors were inverted. The running slowed. The lights in the chapel dimmed further. Mitchell stood. "What is this?" he shouted. "Turn it off." The projector controls were locked. I rushed to the AV closet, bypassed the main feed, cut power to the whole system. The screen went black. The lights snapped back to full intensity. The Glovers were gone. Not just moved. Gone. No door opened. No one saw them leave. I checked the cameras immediately. Footage missing. Not corrupted. Erased. That night, we reviewed the full AV feed from the ceremony. The slideshow had been properly loaded. No secondary video. No alternate files. No sign of external interference. Except for one frame half a second, where the footage of Evelyn running paused. In that single frozen image, she was no longer looking forward. She was looking directly into the camera, mouth open, screaming, but no sound ever played. The next morning, we received a flower delivery. No name on the order. 2 white carnations, and a card. It read, "Thank you for letting us attend. We'll return the favor soon." There was no signature, no tracking code, only the timestamp on the card's corner, 2:59 p.m., the exact minute the Glovers disappeared, the exact minute Evelyn had died, according to the original death report. Except when I checked the death certificate again, it no longer said 2:59. It said 3:47. I looked at the backup file in my private database. It still said 2:59. One of them was lying, but neither had been written by me. In the days that followed Evelyn Halpern's funeral, Hollow Glen became quieter in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of visitors. It was the quiet of expectation, the kind of silence that descends when something is listening, not from a specific place, but from all places at once. Rachel stopped staying past 6. Jason quit without notice. I began to sleep in my office, not because I was working late, but because I had started to feel that if I left the building, something might happen in my absence that I wouldn't be able to undo. And something had shifted in the walls, like the air had taken on a texture, like breath on glass that never cleared. I first heard it the night I stayed through. Not a voice, not in the traditional sense, more like the residue of speech, the way a name might echo in a room long after it's been spoken. It came from the East Wing, the older section, past the viewing chambers we'd closed off for renovations we never completed. The sound slithered beneath the doors, too deliberate to be air pressure, too real to be imagined. I followed it, holding my breath, walking with slow, intentional steps, afraid of what I might interrupt. It came again, 3 syllables. The last one clipped. I couldn't make it out, but I knew it was calling for someone. The temperature in the corridor dropped suddenly. My breath clouded. The overhead lights buzzed and dimmed in sequence, like something was walking just ahead of me, unseen but not absent. I reached the end of the hall, the door labeled Chamber 4B, long sealed, but the handle was warm to the touch, freshly used. I checked the internal logs. Door status? Closed. Last accessed? Never. Except that was a lie, because when I pushed the door, it opened with a slow exhale, like the room itself had been holding its breath. Inside, the gurney was uncovered. The sheet folded at the base, neatly, deliberately. The walls were marked with scratches, faint but persistent. Something had scraped its way along every edge of that room. I turned to leave, but before I could, the whisper came again, louder this time, and this time I recognized it. It was my name, not shouted, not moaned, spoken. Alan. And it came not from the room, but from the intercom system that hadn't worked in years. I ran back to the front office, turned off the building's power main. The system died. The whisper stopped. But the next morning, the building smelled of roses. No flowers had been delivered. The scent came from the ducts, from the corners, from the concrete itself. It was strongest near the front desk, where the guest book used to sit. I had removed the book after the Glover incident. Too many names had started appearing in it that none of us remembered writing down. I checked my private logs again. The guest list for Evelyn's funeral had changed. Not overwritten, grown. 12 new entries. One of them, A. Wexler, my name, but I had not signed anything. Rachel refused to come in that day. She said her daughter had started sleepwalking, whispering things in her sleep, phrases that didn't make sense. They're not done. The doors open again. He said the suit doesn't fit anymore. When I asked Rachel who he was, she said her daughter kept referring to the man in the mirror, but only when the lights are off. I reviewed the security footage from the previous night. At 3:47 a.m., every internal hallway camera glitched for exactly 13 seconds. When the footage resumed, the door to chamber 4B was open again, and standing in front of it, not moving, not blinking, was a figure I couldn't identify. The face was blurred, not pixelated, blurred as if by motion that didn't belong to our timeline. The figure turned toward the camera, and though the footage had no audio, I swear I could feel the whisper again, reverberating through the speakers. Alan. I turned off the feed. That afternoon, Mitchell Halpern returned, unannounced. He didn't ask for a service. He didn't ask about Evelyn. He came to ask if we'd kept the casket. I told him it had been picked up for cremation. He nodded. Good, he said. Then it might still be in one place. When I asked him what that meant, he looked at me with tired eyes and said, You don't need to know, but if you hear her voice again, don't answer. Not even in your thoughts. I asked him who her was. He didn't respond, just turned to leave. Then he paused in the doorway. She never liked being alone. That's what this is. Not haunting, not possession. It's company. And once she finds the right echo, she moves in. That night, I left the building, drove 3 hours away, checked into a roadside motel, didn't tell anyone where I was going, and still, at 3:47 a.m., I woke up to the whisper. Only this time, it wasn't just my name. It was Rachel's, and then Jason's, and then Evelyn's, layered over each other, like a chorus tuning to one voice. I smashed the radio, pulled the wires from the walls, but the whisper wasn't in the devices. It was in the air, in the insulation, in the marrow of the building itself. When I returned to Hollow Glen 2 days later, the flower arrangements from 3 different services had wilted overnight, but the white carnations in the front lobby vase, untouched since the Glover funeral, were still pristine. The intercom buzzed once as I entered. No one else was inside, and the front guest book was open, with a new name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Coming soon, Director Number 3. There was no smudge, no imprint of pen pressure, only the scent of roses, and the feeling that something was reading over my shoulder. By the 7th day, Hollow Glen had stopped pretending to be just a funeral home. The smell of roses was no longer subtle. It seeped into the walls, into the vents, even into the polished mahogany of the caskets. Rachel had gone silent. Her daughter, I heard, had been taken to a hospital after waking up covered in tiny scratches that looked eerily like cursive writing. I didn't ask what it said. Jason never returned my calls. I tried contacting the main office in Albany to request a site inspection, but the line went dead every time I said the name of the facility. So I stopped trying to tell anyone. I told myself I could manage this alone, that it was better this way, that maybe if I played along, whatever this was would finish what it came for and move on. But that was before the second funeral. It wasn't scheduled. It appeared on the docket one morning, printed, signed, sealed, as if the front office had processed it without me. The name on the death certificate was Emery Caldwell. No age, no next of kin. Time of death varies. Occupation, guest. The document bore no official seal, only a small red wax stamp that looked like a closed eye. I thought it was a joke at first, maybe Rachel's way of breaking the silence with morbid humor. But she hadn't been in the building for 4 days. I checked the logs. The file had been uploaded manually from an IP address I didn't recognize. Logged at 3:47 a.m. I went to the service logbook, the old leather-bound one we only used for handwritten entries. It was open to that day's date, and the event was already inked in. Black pen, not my handwriting. I felt the temperature drop again, the now familiar pressure in the air. But I told myself it was fatigue, grief, maybe guilt. I checked the chapel. The chairs had already been arranged, 12 on each side, a single aisle, candles unlit but placed. Everything was perfect, too perfect. No staff had done this, no deliveries, nothing on the cameras. And yet, it was all prepared, like the building itself was obeying a schedule no one had created. Then, just after 3 o'clock, they arrived, one by one. No vehicles, no footsteps, just presence. They didn't speak. They didn't look around. They moved like people who'd been here before, though I had never seen any of them. Pale, but not lifeless. Still, but not at rest. They sat in the chairs, folding their hands on their laps, waiting. For what? I didn't know. But they knew. The air grew heavy. The candles lit themselves. I swear to you, I did not touch a match. The double doors at the back of the chapel opened slowly, and the casket rolled forward. No pallbearers, no machinery, just motion. Smooth, silent motion. The casket was unmarked, but I knew what was inside. I had not embalmed it. I had not dressed it. But I knew Emery Caldwell was real, and he was not dead. The casket stopped at the altar. I approached it, compelled more than curious, every step weighed down by something more than dread. I placed my hand on the lid. It was ice cold. Beneath my palm, I felt not breathing, not movement, but resistance, like something was awake and waiting, deciding whether to reveal itself. I almost turned away, but then the whisper returned closer now. Clear. It wasn't a name this time. It was a question. Do you remember me? I staggered back. No one else moved. The congregation stared ahead, glassy-eyed, frozen in perfect posture. I searched the faces. They were unfamiliar. All but one. Second row, left side. Jason. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. But his eyes followed me. His lips parted slightly, and I thought he might call out. Instead, he mouthed a single word. Run. I turned toward the door. It had vanished. Not closed. Not locked. Gone. Behind me, the casket opened. Not a sound. No creaking. Just the slow rise of the lid, as if lifted by invisible hands. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was listen. The whisper came again, this time from inside. You left the door open, Alan. And then the candles went out. All of them. In an instant, total blackness. I don't remember what happened next. When I awoke, I was in my office. Clothes clean, no dirt, no blood. But the roses were everywhere. Stuffed into drawers, tucked into books, pressed between the pages of the daily log. One even in my shirt pocket, fresh, dew-covered. On my desk was the logbook, open. Today's date, another service scheduled, different name, same signature, same red wax seal. I looked at the name, Rachel Wexler, my sister, alive, uninvolved. At least she had been. Until now, I tried calling her. The line rang once. Then a voice answered not hers. Too late, the line disconnected. That afternoon, a delivery truck arrived, unmarked, driverless. Inside, a single casket, nameplate already attached. I didn't open it, not that day. Instead, I went to chamber 4B. It was already open. Inside, Every single embalming tool was laid out in perfect order, but coated in ash. The gurney bore a single rose, placed exactly where a heart would rest, and scratched into the stainless steel wall in looping cursive far too elegant for this place were the words, "Not all funerals are for the dead." That night, I did not sleep, because sleep now felt like an invitation, and I had learned enough to stop answering things that knock when no one's at the door. But even so, at exactly 3:47 a.m., the chapel bells rang. On their own, a procession had begun again, and this time, it would not stop at just one name. I remember the first time I truly feared the crematorium. Not respected it, not followed protocol or exercised caution, but feared it, like a child fears a closet door left ajar in the dark. For most of my career, the crematory had been the most predictable room in Hollow Glen. It was the last place the dead went. The final chamber, clinical, industrial, and mercifully devoid of sentimentality. But by the 8th day, after the unscheduled funeral for Emery Caldwell and the congregation that arrived without footsteps, even the furnace no longer felt safe. There was something wrong with fire itself, something deeply disobedient. That morning, I entered the crematorium to process what should have been a standard closed casket case. 68-year-old Nora Beach passed peacefully in her sleep, no religious objections, and pre-arranged cremation authorization signed and notarized. She had been delivered at 5:42 a.m. by a team I didn't recognize. 2 men in spotless uniforms bearing no company insignia, no names on their badges, their skin slightly too pale and their eyes slightly too still. They didn't speak. They simply handed over the casket, signed no paperwork, and left. The license plate on the van was blank. As I positioned the body on the gurney for chamber intake, I noticed something I hadn't seen in the prep report. A faint symbol etched just above the left clavicle, almost like an inkless brand. At first glance, it resembled an infinity symbol, but where the lines should have looped continuously, they broke midway, leaving 2 disjointed ends that pointed in opposite directions. I'd never seen a mark like that on a cadaver. I gently brushed my gloved finger over it, and a cold vibration traveled up my arm into my jaw, like the hum of an electrical current without a source. I quickly stepped away, told myself I was overtired, paranoid, irrational. I closed the chamber, locked the door, and started the cycle. The furnace roared to life. It always starts with a deep mechanical thrum, followed by the ignition coil snapping into a steady pulse of flame. But this time, the flame stuttered like it was being pulled in 2 directions. The interior lights of the chamber flickered, casting elongated shadows on the tiled walls, warping the stainless steel controls into something grotesque. I adjusted the dials. The system insisted all metrics were stable: pressure, temperature, gas flow. But the readout showed the interior heat wasn't rising. It was falling. 2 minutes in, the chamber temperature dropped to 712 degrees Fahrenheit, then 540 degrees Fahrenheit, then 389 degrees Fahrenheit. Impossible. The fire was on. I verified the fuel line. It was feeding normally. Then came the noise, not from the chamber, but from within the walls. A knocking, deliberate, rhythmic, like someone was inside the concrete, counting seconds. I backed away, staring at the glass window into the chamber, expecting to see the flames curling upward around Nora's form. But there was no flame, no movement, just her, lying there, eyes wide open. I had checked those eyes. They were sealed with bonding gel. And yet, there they were open, wet, tracking me. The knocking stopped. Then, from the crematorium speakers ones we never used, came a voice. No distortion, no static, just a single word: mistake. I slammed the emergency shutoff, initiated a rapid cool-down, and waited in silence as the chamber hissed and decompressed. The glass fogged over with condensation. The body, if it was a body, remained motionless. 10 minutes later, I opened the chamber door. The body was gone. Not burnt, not disfigured. Gone. The gurney was still there, the straps unbuckled, but the chamber was empty. No remains. No bones, no trace of ash, only the faint imprint of a rose on the warm steel surface. I don't remember placing one there. I checked the delivery logs. There was no record of Nora Beach, no intake timestamp, no cremation authorization. Even her name was absent from the state obituary listings. It was as if she had never existed. But I had touched her. I had seen her eyes. Later that night, I returned to the chamber, trying to rationalize it all, to scan the security footage. The screen flickered briefly before stabilizing, showing static images of an empty room. At 5:42 a.m., no van, no casket. But on the upper right corner of the screen, in the timestamp box, there was a new symbol etched digitally, blinking faintly. That broken infinity. I turned off the feed, printed the log for the day. One file auto-generated. Emery Caldwell. Again. Service scheduled for the next morning. But this time, there was an addendum, to be followed by combustion. I didn't sleep that night. At 2:31 a.m., the fire alarms went off. Not because of heat, but because of cold. The chamber was measured at -14 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside it, a single urn sat untouched. I approached it reluctantly. On the lid, written in precise cursive, etched not with ink, but by something that seemed carved from absence itself, were the words, "She asked not to be remembered." I opened it. Inside, nothing, not even ash. Only that scent again, fresh roses. I locked the crematorium and sealed it from the inside, but I knew that wouldn't stop it. That same day, I found all 12 ovens in the chapel pre-lit. There were no services scheduled, but I checked the logbook. 5 more names. None I recognized. No birth dates. Only a final note on the bottom of the page. Flames do not cleanse when the soul is still watching. That night, as I passed the staff hallway to go home, the incinerator doors creaked open behind me. A single voice called out, childlike, patient, "Alan, would you like to go next?" I turned the lights off without looking back, because now I understood. Hollow Glen had not been built on soil. It had been built on memory, and memory cannot burn. There's something unnatural about hearing a funeral procession before seeing it. Not just the distant hum of engines or the rhythmic crunch of gravel under tires, but the sound of breathless movement, of wheels turning too slow to belong to the living, and footsteps that strike no echo. It was 5:43 a.m. when I woke to the noise, though I hadn't fallen asleep. I had been sitting upright in the director's office chair, a half-drunk cup of cold coffee on my desk, the building silent, but for the occasional pop of cooling pipes. Then came the sound, distant at first, like a memory dragging itself through fog. I stepped into the hallway and looked through the long front window that offered a clear view of the parking lot. What I saw was not headlights or a hearse. There were no cars, only a long line of figures walking down the center of the road, some carrying umbrellas, though no rain fell, others holding nothing, moving in perfect silence. Dozens of them, hundreds, every face forward, every gaze empty, not toward me or past me, but through. I counted 30 before I stopped. The door buzzed, not rang buzzed, as though something inside the mechanism had chosen to open. And the moment it did, the temperature dropped. I watched the figures drift past the threshold without looking at me, their feet never quite touching the tile. The first carried a child. The next wore a veil soaked in something darker than water. One man had no face at all, only a mirror where his features should have been. I backed away as the last entered, not daring to speak, not daring to interrupt. The chapel door opened on its own, slow and deliberate, and one by one they filed inside. No words, no music, only the rustle of fabric, the scrape of nothing across marble. When I finally dared approach, I found the room full but no sound, no breath, no warmth. At the front, on the altar usually reserved for urns or caskets, sat an old wooden box, not one we owned, not anything I'd ever seen. Carved along its side were dozens of initials, scratched in by different hands, different eras. I recognized one, my father's. The walls began to pulse. Not vibrate, pulse. Like a heartbeat, slow and aching. The guests turned to me in unison. Their faces were blank, yet full. I could feel memories trying to enter me, pressing against my skull, looking for a way in. One woman stepped forward. Her mouth did not move, but I heard her as clearly as if she had screamed into my ear. You never gave them rest. Now they will not give you silence. I fell to my knees. I don't remember choosing to. I looked up and found the room empty. Not just of people, of light, of furniture, of walls. I was standing in a field of graves under a violet sky that shimmered like bruised glass. The chapel was gone. Hollow Glen was gone. But the procession continued, winding between headstones older than memory, older than language. They didn't look at me again. They didn't need to. They had delivered what they came to leave. The box remained at my feet. It pulsed, too. When I touched it, I saw all of them. Every unburied grief. Every spirit we cremated but did not remember. Every name erased from the book to make space for another. I saw Rachel in a chapel full of smoke, her eyes wide as the pews screamed. I saw myself, younger, laughing with a family who had buried someone still listening. I saw Nora Beach's brand, Emery Caldwell's frozen breath, the ash that whispered. The chapel returned around me, but it was changed. The architecture was wrong, not damaged, but evolved. The pews were curved inward. The altar was now a pit, and from that pit rose the scent of lavender and fire. The guests were gone, but not the procession. I could still hear it outside, circling the building endlessly. I checked the door. It was locked from the outside. The lights would not come on. My watch reads 6:16 a.m. It would remain that way for hours. No one came. No one called. Only the slow grinding of footsteps through gravel. Again and again and again. I opened the box. Inside were fragments. Not bones, not ashes. Pieces of paper. Each bore a name I remembered vaguely mispronounced once at a funeral, or forgotten by a relative who couldn't attend. Names that were never said again. The box was not for storage. It was for keeping what the world had erased. That night, as I finally broke a window and climbed out, the procession stopped. Every figure turned to me, and one of them, impossibly familiar, reached into their coat and withdrew a folded paper. I took it without question. Inside was a photo. My photo, future dated, obituary style. Below it, scheduled for service. Delayed. I looked up. The procession resumed. I was no longer its director. I was its destination. They say when you bury a body, you bury the story with it, but that's a lie we tell ourselves to sleep at night. I used to believe it too, that our job as funeral directors was to shepherd grief gently to its resting place, to give the living one last ritual to hold on to before letting go. But some stories refuse burial. Some dead refuse silence. And when I stepped out of that chapel, after the procession vanished, when the ash-stained sky folded back into a pale morning and the first light hit my face like the memory of fire, I understood something I hadn't been ready to accept until then. I was no longer just a man who managed the dead. I was one of the last living custodians of something older than burial rites, older than ceremony, older even than death itself. I didn't go home. I wandered. The roads around Hollow Glen curved where they once ran straight. Street signs bore names that sounded close, but not quite right. And the air held a stillness that didn't belong to early morning, but to the edges of a sealed tomb. No one looked at me. No cars passed. Only the sound of my footsteps reminded me I was still tethered to a body that cast a shadow. Eventually, my wandering led me back not to the mortuary as it stood, but to the field where the original Hollow Glen Chapel had been founded, decades before I inherited it. The ground there was uneven, patched with grass and broken stone, and in the middle stood Rachel, barefoot, eyes closed, mouth moving in prayer, or perhaps recitation. I didn't interrupt. I couldn't. Her presence there was like a thread pulled tight through the fabric of everything that had come before. When she finally opened her eyes, She handed me something, an old brass key. "You know what this is," she said, and I did. Though I'd never seen it before, I knew what door it opened. Not a door in the physical sense, but something else. A ledger, a vault, a memory. We walked in silence back toward the chapel. As we approached, the building shimmered. There is no better word for it. Its architecture had shifted again, more drastically this time. The walls curved inward like ribs. The stained glass windows no longer depicted saints or lily, but closed eyes, open mouths, and names. So many names. Inside, the altar was gone. In its place was a spiral staircase descending into the floor where the pulpit had once stood. I held the key in my hand, but the door was already open. We descended together. The stairs were longer than they should have been, deeper than the foundation allowed. We passed through layers of stone, bone, rusted pipes, and something else, folds of air that felt thick and sentient. Finally, we reached the bottom, and there it was, the ledger. A book as large as a coffin, its pages made of what looked like skin, its writing moving across the surface in shifting black ink. It breathed. It pulsed. I opened it, and for a moment, I wasn't reading names. I was living them. I saw each death not as a date and certificate, but as an unfinished sentence, an echo that had been flattened under formality. People who had died screaming. Others who had been buried alive, not in the literal sense, but forgotten too quickly. A child mispronounced at her own service. A man whose final words were written over by polite eulogies. A woman who never existed on paper because her family burned her records out of shame. Each of them asked for nothing more than recognition. That's all it ever was. Not haunting, not revenge. Just the need to be remembered correctly, to be said aloud. I turned the page and found a list not of the dead, but of the living. My name was there. Rachel's too. Every funeral director who had signed the wrong time on a certificate, who had misspelled a name, who had allowed the industry's efficiency to erase the ritual's purpose. The ink below my name was not yet dry. It moved as though awaiting a signature. I didn't sign it. I closed the ledger. Rachel looked at me, and in her gaze, I saw the same understanding, that our job had never been to contain death, but to translate it. We couldn't undo the mistakes of the past, but we could remember. We could refuse to let any name fall silent again. We carried the ledger back up the stairs. It was heavier than any casket I've ever borne. In the chapel, we placed it at the center of the room, where the altar once stood. The procession did not return, but the air shifted, calmer, like breath after panic. Hollow Glen would never be what it was. It shouldn't. We didn't embalm another body that week. We didn't conduct another service. We sat beside the ledger in silence and read names aloud, one by one, as the wind outside grew warmer. I don't know if the dead heard us, but I know the silence didn't fight back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't being watched by something waiting to be remembered. I was being watched by something that had finally been seen.